A fractious and for some fearful time in the UK since October the 7th. The government framed today's announcement as part of an ongoing debate about extremism following recent events.
We have seen a shocking increase in extremist disruption and criminality.
But in fact, its new definition won't affect the way these marches are policed and isn't statutory. Critics say it could threaten public protest and free speech. The new definition of extremism is described as the promotion or advancement of an ideology based on violence, hatred or intolerance that aims to destroy the fundamental rights and freedoms of others or undermine the UK's system of parliamentary democracy. Groups falling under the definition would effectively be cancelled, unable to engage or lobby government bodies or receive funding.
To marginalise extremist groups and to support and strengthen those communities where extremists are most active.
The announcement came not from the Home Secretary but the Communities Secretary. Michael Gove rode back from publishing a full list of groups as had been leaked this week. Instead, he used parliamentary privilege to name-check two right-wing
organisations such as the British National Socialist Movement and Patriotic Alternative, who promote neo-Nazi ideology,
and three Muslim groups who will be assessed under the new definition.
Organisations such as the Muslim Association of Britain, which is the British affiliate of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Listening as the organisation she chairs was named Raghad Al-Tikriti.
It seems like it sends the message you are welcome to be a Muslim in Britain today, as long as you are not a politicised one, you're not someone who's got opinions or dissent to the stances of the government.
It's not the first time that governments, including Tony Blair's, have tried to define extremism and the British values it undermines. Theresa May struggled back in 2017 and it scuppered her counter-terrorism bill. Michael Gove hopes to have got round this, but critics say he's launched his new definition without engaging with the very groups that are affected. He's accused of undermining instead of building consensus.
Some within the Prime Minister's own party believe he'd be better off dialing down the rhetoric on extremism and focusing on things like the economy.
What started as protests on our street has descended into intimidation.
After this unusual speech outside Number 10, three former Home Secretaries, including Priti Patel, warned about the risks of politicising the issue.
So how this guidance will be applied against existing definitions in law of racism, incitement and intimidation.
Angela Rayner.
There had been fears the government would use the list to try and embarrass Labour by pointing out links between the party and some of the groups.
Can the Secretary of State explain which groups this new definition will affect and where the government has chosen to draw the line?
Gove is saying that extremism is ideology which aims to overturn or undermine the UK's democracy. Does the MCB do any of that?
No, the Muslim Council of Britain doesn't do any of the activities that appear to be what the definition is talking about. In fact, the opposite is the case. We've been encouraging people to engage in our democracy, to write to their MPs, to vote in elections.
It's been suggested Miqdad Verse's organisation may be on the new list. The Tories refused to engage with the MCB, it's understood, over a historical row about a statement on Gaza. Yet they did consult with them about vaccine take-up during COVID. He questions the inconsistency.
This week we've had a donor to the Conservative Party actually talking about the shooting, the physical shooting of a Labour MP. That's apparently not extreme. How does this make sense? And I think that's the challenge we're faced right now with, which is that it seems that Muslim communities are being targeted in a way that is not being used across the board.
The government says a new Centre for Excellence made of civil servants will gather intelligence and publish a full list of groups. Critics insist it must have independent oversight and be based on evidence, not ideology.
Darshana Soni there. Well, more now from our political editor Gary Gibbon, who earlier today spoke to the Community Secretary Michael Gove ahead of his announcement and asked him what problem he was addressing with this new definition of extremism.
Some individuals and some organisations which are extremist have taken advantage of government funding and government platforms to advance their own agenda. And so we need to be more precise and more careful in those whom we partner with.
So this is addressing a mistake that successive Tory governments have made
of linking up with people that actually, on reflection, you think are extremists, and maybe even funding them?
Well, yes, and indeed William Shawcross, in his independent review of Prevent, drew attention to this. And I think it's been an issue where a lack of institutional knowledge about how correctly to identify extremist organisations has been a challenge. So we're being more precise in our definition and exercising greater care over how it is used. But one particular and conspicuous case is the case of Mr. Shakil Beg. In his case, he was able to work with local government, with the Metropolitan Police, and indeed with the NHS in order to present himself as a moderate. The courts found that he was anything but. In that case, of course, he was attempting to use the legitimacy that comes from working with those trusted organisations to advance his own agenda. So, of course, it is a matter for central government, but it's also the case that I would hope that we would all exercise appropriate vigilance.
More comfortable giving an apology? It sounds like you think the government has done something gravely wrong over a long period.
I think it's important that the government seeks to do better, and I think that it's critical that all of us recognise that this is, as the debate shows, difficult and often contested territory, which is why I think striving for a greater degree of precision is important.
Is your list contested? Because some people are expecting us to see a list today, potentially, and it didn't appear as though the ministerial right round had happened. Have other people told you, hold your horses?
Well,
right, within government?
No, my own view very strongly is that it's important that before we definitively say that an organisation is extremist, that appropriate due diligence is undertaken. Now, of course, and during the round of interviews that I've been taking today, there have been a number of people who've invited me to call out a specific type of behaviour or to specify a particular organisation and say definitively that that is extremist. I can't do that because, while of course I can express concern, I need to make sure that any ultimate decision about saying that an organisation is extremist is influenced by the evidence that is presented to me and to the Home Secretary.
And this isn't just a trap for Labour councils who you think have maybe been in contact a bit more recently with some of the organisations you intend to put on this list.
No,
I'm not going to see an online surge of, look, they're with extremists from the Conservative Party.
No.
In the run-up to the locals, in the run-up to the general.
Absolutely not. Because, as you quite rightly point out, every institution needs to consider with care. Government is saying these are the rules that we will be bound by. Others will make their own judgments about this, but it's important that government is more precise and clear when it's dealing with external organisations.
Michael Gove speaking to Gary Gibbon there earlier. Well, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, says Mr Gove risks stoking up tensions and creating further divisions with this new policy. I spoke to him earlier about this and other issues and began by asking him if he agreed there was a problem that needed tackling.
I think we've got to be preventing violent extremism. I think what we all have welcomed today is a new strategy, how to counter extremism. What we'd have welcomed today is a new plan, how to counter hatred. Instead, what we got was a new definition. I'm unclear what we're supposed to do with this, because the problem is you've got communities up and down the country who feel like the government's not on their side, and you've got minority communities who are worried and concerned. This is yet another example of the government picking them.
We did get a bit more than a definition, didn't we? Because we got an emerging list. I mean, Michael Gove named in the Commons 3 Islamic groups and 2 far-right groups that he said were problematic. Are any of them groups that you would meet or fund? Be clear about this.
Well, no, I'm not funding them or meeting them. But
would you in future? I mean, do you agree that they're problematic?
But here's the point. The government is saying the consequence of being in one of these groups is the government will no longer engage with you, right? Well, does that mean they've been engaging with them over the last 14 years? My nervousness with a list of groups that are extremist, by the way, not breaking the law criminally, is we're in danger of sending these groups underground. I can understand the temptation to ostracise and alienate. What I'd rather do is put them to the surface, expose them for the views they've got, and try and bring them into mainstream democracy and a mainstream way of life.
Lee Anderson, the former Tory MP, now Reform Party MP, says he's had overwhelming sympathy from the public and even MPs after he said that you were being controlled by Islamists. What have been the personal consequences for you of what he said?
Well, look, let's be quite clear. Enoch Powell received warm messages after the Rivers of Blood speech. right? If that's the criteria for whether you're right or wrong, that's the wrong criteria to use. What he said, speak to independent experts, independent commentators, was clearly Islamophobic, anti-Muslim and racist. As a consequence of what he said, you know, we've had increased hatred against me. We know, as a consequence of what he said, mainstreaming views that are clearly racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. Many people across this country, not just in London, have felt frightened and scared. What I don't understand, and it upsets me, because he should know better, is why Rishi Sunak isn't calling this out for what it is. He said it's wrong, it's inappropriate. What he's not said is it's racist, Islamophobic and anti-Muslim.
One of your political colleagues who's had more racism and abuse than perhaps any other politician is Diane Abbott, most recently in the row over the Conservative donor Frank Hester. Should Diane Abbott get the Labour whip back, in your view?
Well, firstly, Frank Hester should be condemned unequivocally for saying things that are racist and misogynistic, and the Conservative Party should return the £10 million he gave to
more,
them.
apparently, now.
More than £10 million he gave to them. By the way, Hester's not apologised for saying things that are racist and misogynistic. He's apologised for being rude. It's really important to distinguish those two things. I've known Diane for decades. She's somebody who I looked up to when I was a boy and saw her elected for the first time in 1987. She's a friend. She's been a champion and advocate against social injustice and racial injustice, but what she said was wrong. It was wrong on so many levels, so it's right and proper. She's apologised, and I welcome that.
Right, this is what she said about Jews experiencing prejudice and not racism.
Yeah, I mean, it
right.
was just, you know...
But should she be forgiven for that and get the whip back?
Here's the thing. What I think should happen is the independent process that the Labour Party has needs to be sped up, because it's now been more than a year.
But that process could be completed today, within 24 hours.
I'm hoping that the process that's taking place with Diane is resolved sooner rather than later.
But she also points out that the Ford report exposed shocking levels of racism and sexism from within the Labour Party, much of it directed against her. There's been no accountability or an apology for that, she says. Should there be? Has she been badly treated by the party?
Well, I've not read the Ford report recently. I did read it when it first came out. What I do know is what Keir and the team have done in the Labour Party is make sure all the recommendations in relation to the Equality and Human Rights Commission are taken on board, and that's really important, and also taken very seriously the Ford report.
Sadiq Khan, thanks very much.